If the mind asks to be released, but the body can still survive, who holds the right to decide? Can dignity be preserved in a body that no longer houses memory, desire, or self-awareness? If a body rejects the mind imposed upon it, does it have the right to author its own identity? Is continuity of memory more ethically binding than continuity of biology? Should consent from a conscious mind override the symbolic value others place on the body? When does potential personhood become subordinate to actual autonomy? Can we ethically preserve life if the mind within it no longer consents to being alive? Is it moral to discard a body if the mind no longer identifies with it, or immoral to keep it against the mind's will? How do we arbitrate dignity when two parts of the same being make opposing claims? What kind of justice system could honor both psychological sovereignty and embodied history? Mind transfer suggests the preservation of psychological continuity, memory, personality traits, values, and relational history. It maintains what some describe as the narrative self, the internal structure often associated with personal identity. Body duplication retains physical appearance but may not include the experiential or psychological dimensions. It presents a familiar exterior, though questions remain about its ontological status and subjective authenticity. Expressions of love often extend beyond physical features. They may reflect a recognition of personhood, an evolving interior shaped by shared experiences, emotional resonance, and mutual understanding. Philosophical considerations. Personal identity. This debate aligns with thinkers like Derek Parfit, who argue that psychological continuity may be more central to identity than bodily persistence. Ethics of attachment. Emotional bonds, including grief and love, are frequently tied to perceived psychological presence. A body without familiar cognition may feel unfamiliar, while a familiar mind in a new body may evoke continuity or transformation. Consent and continuity. Ethical questions arise around autonomy and embodiment. Would an individual consent to mind transfer? Does preserving cognition honor their identity, or does it risk displacing embodied experience? Emotional recognition. In this framework, love can be interpreted as a form of recognition, identifying someone through their thoughts, emotional patterns, and shared memories rather than physical traits alone. The body may serve as a vessel, while the mind provides the map of relational meaning. Emerging technologies prompt reflection on what we value most in others: cognitive presence, emotional resonance, and shared narrative rather than appearance alone. If we define identity as the persistence of memory, personality, and self-awareness, then someone who has lost all memory might be seen as no longer the same person. This view echoes Locke's theory. Personal identity is tied to consciousness and memory. No memory equals no self. But here's the catch. Loss of identity does not equal loss of moral worth. Step 2. Moral status beyond identity. Even if someone lacks memory or consciousness, for example, in a vegetative state, they still possess moral status, a right not to be harmed. This is grounded in their human dignity, embodied history, and social embeddedness. They are still someone's child, sibling, partner. Their body carries relational and symbolic weight. So while they may not be them in the psychological sense, they are still them in the ethical and communal sense. Step 3. The vegetative state dilemma. People in vegetative states challenge our frameworks. They lack consciousness but retain biological life. Some argue that without awareness, personhood is gone. Others insist that being human is enough regardless of cognitive function. The ethics here hinge on consent, prior wishes, and societal values. Killing someone in a vegetative state isn't just about identity, it's about violating the norms of care, autonomy, and respect. Final rung, identity not equal to justification. So even if memory loss disrupts identity, it doesn't justify harm. Our moral obligations often extend beyond psychological continuity. They include respect for embodied life, recognition of past relationships, protection of vulnerable persons, upholding societal norms of care. Imagine standing at the edge of a technological miracle. A loved one is dying, but you're offered a choice. One path duplicates their body, flawless and familiar, but empty of memory. The other transfers their mind into a new body, unfamiliar in form, but rich in continuity. Most would choose the mind. Why? Because love, it seems, is not anchored in flesh. It's indexed to memory, personality, and the shared architecture of experience. We recognize our loved ones not by the curve of their jaw, but by the way they remember our stories, finish our sentences, and hold our pain. Identity in this framing is psychological, woven from memory, not muscle. But this raises a darker question. If memory is the thread of personhood, what happens when it snaps? Would it be morally permissible to harm someone who's lost all memory? If they are no longer them, does our obligation dissolve? And what does this mean for those in vegetative states, alive but without awareness? Here, the ladder of logic begins to split. On one rung, we see identity as psychological continuity. No memory, no self. But on the next, we confront moral status, something deeper, more stubborn. Even without memory, a person retains dignity. Their body is a vessel of history, a symbol of relational meaning. They are still someone's child, someone's partner, someone's past. To harm them is not just to erase a person, it's to violate the norms of care, autonomy, and respect that scaffold our humanity. So we arrive at a paradox. Identity may fade, but moral worth persists. The mind may vanish, but the body still demands reverence. Our ethical obligations are not contingent on cognitive function alone. They are rooted in the embodied communal and symbolic dimensions of being. In the end, we do not love merely minds or bodies. We love the continuity between them. And when that continuity breaks, our duty is not to discard but to protect what remains. Who we are when memory fades, and who gets to decide. We often speak of dignity as if it is intrinsic, something etched into the soul or encoded in biology. But what if dignity is not a fixed property, but a relational one? What if it lives in the eye of the beholder, and more importantly, in the will of the consenting subject? In this light, dignity becomes not just a moral shield, but a directional signal pointing us toward the wishes, boundaries, and self-authored meanings of the person in question. So now the thought experiment deepens. If a mind, preserved and aware, requests the discarding of its past living tissue, should we honor that? Is the body merely a relic, a vessel no longer needed? Or flip the frame. If a newly instantiated body, fresh and autonomous, rejects the mind imposed upon it, claiming its own right to self-definition, do we respect that refusal? This is no longer just a question of identity. It's a question of consensual sovereignty. Identity does not equal moral status. Memory loss may dissolve psychological identity, but moral worth persists. 2. Moral status does not equal dignity. Moral status can be universal. Dignity, in this framing, is situated, held in relation to consent and recognition. 3. Dignity as consent indexed. Dignity is not just what we project onto others, it is what they claim for themselves. It's the right to define what matters, what remains, and what is released. 4. Conflict of sovereignties. When the mind and body diverge in their wishes, we face a sovereignty dilemma. Do we honor the continuity of memory and its authority over the past? Or do we honor the embodied present and its right to reject imposed narratives? 5. Ethical resolution. The answer may not lie in choosing one over the other, but in designing systems that mediate consent, negotiate dignity, and respect plural claims to selfhood. Imagine a future where advanced technology allows the mind and body of a person to be separated and sustained independently. Each now exists as a distinct entity with its own capacity for awareness and consent. Case A. The mind requests disposal of the body. The mind, preserved in a digital substrate, retains full memory, personality, and autonomy. It views the biological body as obsolete, a source of trauma, illness, or unwanted identity. It formally requests, "I do not consent to the continued preservation of my former body. It no longer represents me. Please dispose of it respectfully." Ethical tension. The body is still biologically alive, though in a suspended animation state with the capacity to develop destroyed brain structures and a mind. Loved ones may feel attachment to the body as a symbolic vessel. Does the mind's sovereignty override the embodied history? Case B. The body rejects the mind. The body, newly instantiated with biological autonomy and emergent awareness, begins to form its own identity. It expresses, "I do not consent to the imposition of this mind. I reject its memories, its traumas, its authority. I wish to live free of its influence. Ethical tension. The mind sees itself as the original person. The body claims the right to self-definition. Who holds the moral claim to personhood, the continuity of memory, or the autonomy of emergence? Choice, sovereignty, and the ethics of becoming. In debates over abortion, we often hear arguments about life, viability, and rights. But beneath these terms lies a deeper philosophical tension, the conflict between mind and body, and the question of who gets to define dignity. Before 24 weeks, the fetus has a body, but not yet a mind in the sense of self-awareness, memory, or autonomous will. There is no psychological continuity, no narrative self, no capacity to consent. The body exists, but the mind has not yet instantiated. In contrast, the pregnant person possesses both a body and a mind, fully formed and sovereign. They hold memories, relationships, values, and the capacity to consent. Their dignity is not theoretical, it is lived, relational, and self-authored. So when we ask whose dignity matters, we must ask whose consent is possible. And when dignity is indexed to consent, the ethical weight tilts toward the person who can speak, choose, and define their own boundaries. To force continuations of a pregnancy before the emergence of fetal mind is to prioritize potential identity over actual sovereignty. It is to impose a moral status on tissue that cannot yet hold meaning, while denying agency to a person who already does.